You said we are good.
Yes, we're
Okay. Hi, my name is Chad Peppers. The class I'll be giving today, or the session, will be Introduction to Entities. Kind of what entities are, and then we'll dive into some code as well. If you do want to follow along, the little bit.ly is to my GitHub, to the site that I'll be doing here. First slide, who's this guy? My name's Chad, like I said. I've been a Drupal developer for 3 years. There's many people here that's been developing Drupal longer than me. I actually started in Drupal 7, but my lack of time developing in Drupal, I learned a lot about Drupal myself. I have a passion for Drupal. I really like it. My Twitter, @ChadPeppers. And my Drupal.org username is Chad Peppers. You notice I don't get too unique with those things. Oh, and I work for BML, which is based out of Kansas City. We're a digital agency. My team, we do a lot of Drupal development, primarily Drupal development. What we'll cover today, what is an entity, loading existing entities, displaying entities with the entity metadata wrapper class, and comparing nodes to our own custom entity, creating our own entity type, adding admin fields, and integrating views with our own entity, and then some other entity goodies. The audience, back-end developers primarily, because there's a lot of custom coding, people who love to program, or just people who want a better understanding of entities. What is an entity? Entities are objects. They contain entity types, bundles, and fields. And here I went and put the entity API module on here because that is one of the requirements. And what it does is extends the Drupal core entity API to provide a unified way to handle entities. And then it also provides CRUD operations for your entities.
What does CRUD stand for?
Create, read, update, and delete. Thanks for asking. The entity API module is in Drupal 8. So, entity types. Entity types are a useful abstraction to group fields together. And in the earlier versions of Drupal, before my day, only content types were fieldable. But now entities that integrate with the entity API can take advantage of fields. So this is a big thing for Drupal, and it still is. Your common entity types that are in core are nodes, users, comments, and taxonomy. And then there is some contrib modules that take advantage of the entity API, such as bean, which is block entities aren't nodes. Profile 2, which is basically a way to extend users. And the Drupal Commerce module is one of the big drivers of the entity API, actually. Bundles are implementation of an entity type to which fields can be attached. So basically, whenever you create a content type in Drupal, you're actually building a bundle of the node entity. So the examples are when you install Drupal, you have a basic page in the article that comes installed. Those are bundles of the node entity. And then not all entities have multiple bundles, such as users. There's only one bundle, and it is the user, so not all of them have to have multiple. Each bundle can be fieldable, but you don't have to field your entity. Fields are properties that are attached to bundles. Text. I think we all know what fields are. If you've been dabbling in Drupal very long. And finally, this is actually taken from Drupal.org. And if you come from object-oriented programming, this may make some sense, but an entity type would be your base class. A bundle would be your extended class, so inheriting from that class. A field would be your property or variable to your object. And then an entity is just an instance of that particular entity type. Okay, so first we're going to dive into a little bit of code here. So working with existing entities. So how many people here know what node load, the node load function is? Everybody loves node load. Well, the entity API provides a generic way of loading entities called entity load. And basically here, my IDs 1, 2, 3, which would be your node ID or a unique identifier of that entity. And then the entity load function, I send my IDs, and what I get back is an associative array of entities. And then you have the entity load single if you don't need to load more than one, obviously. So let me show an example here. So here I'm loading 3 different types of entities. One is a node, one is a user, and one is a custom entity that I created, a tweet. And we'll go into that later. But I actually made, let me explain this. So I made a tweet node type. So not to be confusing. So you can see when we load the node, you have all the stuff, properties of the tweet, the title, you got your fields and whatnot. And then mine is pretty similar, but not as much stuff. So let me actually show you the code here. So I made a custom module. Try not to confuse anybody too much. I have the hook menu system. If you're not familiar with that, it's basically a way of adding a page and letting Drupal know that you're creating a page. But we won't worry about how that works. Also, just to let you know, I'm hooking into the hook theme. So I'm providing a theme to my module, and that's a whole nother session. But just letting you know that that's how we're doing things here. And basically what it does is allow me to make my own template files. And I'm doing that just for better examples. So the first thing, so this page that we see, I'm loading my entities here using the entity load single. So here I'm saying I want to load an entity called node, and here's the node ID. And then here I'm loading user and user ID, which is 1, which is admin. And then here my custom entity, I called it a DrupalCorn tweet, and I'm sending it the ID as well, which is 401. And then just to let everybody know, this is the theme function. I'm sending my values to a template. Long story short, let's exit out of this guy. So here's my page, and basically I'm just another thing is the DPM function is basically devel, and it's like a prettied up version of var dump, and I love DPM.
And are you editing all that in PHP Storm? Is that right?
What's that?
For your editor?
Yeah, this is a PHP Storm, which I highly recommend if anybody does not use it and are back-end developer, or front-end. Actually, it works really well. And we'll explain a little bit more here, so we'll ignore this code for now. But that's just me loading entities. That's just, pretty basic stuff. Now, one of the issues is, what if I want to load an entity based on a certain criteria? And you may run into this issue. That's where the entity field query comes into play. And basically, it's an object that query entities based on their field properties. And this was actually taken off of Drupal.org. So, kind of looks confusing at first. But basically what this is saying is, I want to load an entity type of a node, and with the bundle of an article, with a status of 1, which is basically saying it's published. And then here's field conditions. So say there's a field called news types with the value of spotlight. So it starts filtering by these fields, so it returns the results that you want. Similar, kind of like doing a view, but you're doing it in code. But it doesn't use views. And then there's other things, and these can be really simple. This is kind of more of a complex version of it, but there's also things like this add metadata. So basically, you're running the query as the admin. So if there's anything blocking certain types, and let's look at that. So let's load up. So here I load my entities with the entity field query. So here's the result. So I'm loading my node and I'm loading my custom entity that I created. And I'm just loading all of them, basically. And the way the entity field query works, it doesn't send you back the actual object. It basically sends you back information about that object. So if you're actually wanting to use this, you're going to have to load it in entity load. So let me show you the code on that. So here's my code here, DrupalCorn entity load page. And keep in mind, as I'm going along, you can do this anywhere in your code, anywhere you're doing PHP, and there's certain ways you can do it. So these are all for examples. They're not, basically, I'm not saying that this is the only way you have to do it. So, actually looking at the wrong function. All right, so here is the entity field query. And so all I'm doing, this is real basic. So I have the entity type of node, and a bundle is a tweet, which is my content type. And then I'm filtering on a Twitter handle. So actually what I did, and I forgot to mention this, I built a Twitter API to integrate and bring in all the tweets that you guys have been tweeting at hashtag DrupalCorn. So I brought them in and created it from their API. And I created them as a tweet node, and I created them as my custom tweet entity. So basically what I'm doing here is, and I just chose an example, Mark Drummond. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm pulling in all the tweets from Mark Drummond. And then I'm pulling all the tweets from my custom entity from Mark Drummond. Is that
That's me.
Okay, I knew. Yeah, so let's see what he's been tweeting about. Hashtag introduction to
I gotta
entity
go
suck.
quick here.
This session's terrible.
Yeah, well, I have to run it on cron, so if he's tweeting right now, it's not gonna work. So, anyways, sorry if I'm fumbling around here. I'm hoping I'm not losing anybody. So he's tweeted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many times since I've done the cron run. And this will actually, here's another template. So since entity field query just gave us information about our entity, we have to load it before we can actually do something with it. So here, loading the node version of it, just like we showed earlier. And I'm actually, I'm printing the values using the entity metadata wrapper, but which we will go into in a minute. So that's basically it on that. So here's actually his tweets. You want to read them or whatnot, but cornhole because hashtag DrupalCorn. I thought that one was funny. All right, back to the slides. All right, so what I was just talking about, the entity metadata wrapper, It is a wrapper class that helps create entities and handle entity properties easier. And the way that it works, it's pretty simple. You say, I want an entity wrapper, and you tell it what entity type, and then you send it the entity object. And so it returns a class for you to be able to do whatever you want. And so here's some examples of what you can do with it. If you want a property, not a field, but if you want a property, say a title or the author or whatever, you can just say entity wrapper and my property. If you want to save, all you do is just run the save method. So you can make changes to your entity wrapper in your node or your entity, and then you can save it, and it just saves it as if you were doing a node save or whatever. And then here's how you access the field name, value, and then you can set here. So I set and I put save twice for some reason on here, but I think I meant to put delete. So you can actually delete using the entity metadata wrapper. And let me show you actually on this page. So here, wrapping my entity in the wrapper using, just telling it this is going to be a node, and then here's the node that I loaded. And so here I'm just printing the title, which is the value. Pretty easy stuff. And then here I'm doing the same thing, except I'm telling it I want a DrupalCorn tweet, and then it's expecting my entity. So I'm doing the same thing here, except this one's on a node, this one's on our own custom. And one of the things I do want to point out here is how many people have printed values like this right here? Because I'm guilty of that, right? This is technically not the way you're supposed to do it. But as you know in Drupal, there's about 10 different ways to do everything. And here's actually the way you're supposed to do it, not using entity metadata wrapper, is basically I'm getting the field items, and I wanted the field tweet or whatever. And then I get the field view value, and then I run it through a Drupal render. And so that renders your field for you. But it's not, seems like it takes a little bit more steps, and sometimes you just want the raw value or whatever. So it's, in my opinion, better to use entity metadata wrapper for any kind of thing like that. All right, next up. So creating our own entity. Why would we want to create our own entity whenever the content type and content construction is so easy, right? If you look at it in object-oriented terms, not everything is a node. You know, if you diagrammed up all your content types that you're going to use on a website, and you put it in object-oriented, everything's extending from the node class, and that's not necessarily correct because everything's not a node. But nodes became easy because they're easy to create. You just go to structure, add content type, add a couple fields, and bam, you're there. Performance, nodes are loaded into the node table. And if anybody's worked on a large-scale website, the node table gets filled up very quickly, sometimes with hundreds of thousands or millions of records, because everything's a node. So it all goes in the table. So when you're in that situation, everything that you're doing with nodes becomes significantly longer. The good thing about making your own entity is it uses its own table in the database. So things can be, you get some performance. And then flexibility on the CRUD operations. You know, you have a better, in my opinion, this could be debatable, and more unique CRUD operations. And programming is cool. Who doesn't want to write, you know, sometimes you can build a whole site without writing very little code in PHP. So when you get a chance to, Might as well. All right. Before we begin, you need the Entity API module. And then here's some modules that I'm going to be using in the example. They're not required, but Display Suite, it manages view modes. So I can create a view mode for my entity. You can do this in programming, but I prefer to use Display Suite. It's just a personal thing. Views, everybody knows views. Entity references is a way to reference entities. And features, I like to build everything in features. Package it up. So before we build our entity, look at the entity classes. So you have the entity class, and then which is the base entity class. You have the entity API controller, which provides the CRUD operations for your entity. And then you have the entity default UI controller, which handles the admin portion of it. Okay, so creating our own custom entity. Couple things you need is the first one is hook schema. This is not required, actually. You can actually, if you go into your database and just create a table and add some stuff in there, you can use that in your entity. But the Drupal way is slap it in a hook schema so that it take care of that. Hook entity info is basically telling the entity API about your entity, so it knows. So let's load up our entity here. So the way that I added it to a feature, and our entity is called the DrupalCorn tweet. And basically, really you just need a module file, install, and then that's really about it. But I want to go over the install file first, which this is a hook schema. And basically what it does is that when you enable your module, it'll create your table in the database for you. And it provides information, say, to other modules that want to know about what table you created in Drupal, instead of just building it and putting it in there. And so you basically just send it an associative array, and basically I'm saying that here is the table in the database. Here's an ID, title, created at, updated at. Here's my primary key, which is the ID. So if you think about it in a node, it's the NID, the node ID. But ours, we just, ID. So we won't dive too much into this. But once, let me show you an example. So whenever I did enable the module, the DrupalCorn tweet table is now in my Drupal database. And you see ID, title, created at, updated at. And you can add whatever you want. You're not limited to those four, obviously. And then our hook entity info. So here, basically, this is information, quite a bit of information about our entity. Label is just the label of it. DrupalCorn tweets. This is telling the base table is basically just telling you what table in the database to look for. The entity keys, the ID is mapped to my install schema, and then label is the title. And we won't dive too much into this because it's probably a whole nother session, but just to give you a background, you have to set your entity class, your controller class. You're just basically telling Drupal what classes to use. This portion, if you actually want an admin UI to manage it, you just slap this guy in here and it takes care of it. The module is, you're telling me what the module is. And this is what makes it extremely powerful is if I want to add fields to my entity, I just say fieldable true. So, bam, you got a fieldable entity. And then another thing that makes it powerful is the views controller class. So the Entity API provides a default views controller. So if you want to integrate your entity into views, you just simply tell it that you want to. And that's all there is to it. And then here you notice that you have bundles. You can create multiple bundles of your entity. So I only have one bundle, and it's the DrupalCorn tweet, and that's about it. So let me actually show you. So whenever it's created, I now have my entity admin because I told it it was an admin. I wanted admin area. So here is all of my tweets that I pulled in. You can view them. You can edit them. Delete them. You can manage your fields here, so you can make them fieldable. Manage your display. So here I'm use display suite to create a teaser view mode. So anywhere I want to display a certain tweet in a teaser mode, then you already have it here. And that's kind of an overview on actually creating it. So basically, just recapping what I did. You're adding the admin UI. It's the entity UI controller, making the fieldable entity fieldable. I just put too easy because you just say fieldable true. Integrating seamlessly with the views. Just use the entity default views controller. And I'm going to do an example of an entity reference. So everybody knows what entity reference, well, I wouldn't say everybody knows, but how many people have used entity reference? It's pretty common when you build a site. Like this one of the, I don't think I've built a site without entity reference, to be honest with you. I'm sure I have, but. So I built a content type, or well, I'm using the default article content type, just for an example. So say we're building a blog or whatever, and you want to add a tweet to the end of it using entity reference. It works like any other entity reference. You basically just put in what the title is or whatever, and save it. And basically I'm pulling in the tweet right here. And let me just go and show you how that works real quick. It's very easy. So what I do, tweet to, show you an example. Say I want an entity reference. Let's just make it autocomplete because there's quite a bit of them. So it loads up here. Now, you know, everybody's used to doing the node type here. Your entity actually appears in this list automatically using the entity API. So now I want an entity reference to that. You know, you can do your sort by. So if we do a sort by, you can see I have the title that was in my hook schema. And then bam, you got an entity reference to your entity. Pretty straightforward on that. And that's what I really like about the entity API. It is kind of confusing when you first build your first entity, but once you do, you can quickly build them. Here's some other goodies. The couple methods in our entity metadata wrapper. I should have probably put that on there. You can get property information and get identifier. Get property information will display, give you all the values in your metadata wrapper, your properties or your fields. The get identifier is basically returning the ID or the node ID or the UID, whatever object you're working. It's returning you the identifier. Deleting entity using entity metadata wrapper. You just do a delete here. So I'm going to show you also how easy it is to integrate with views. So I want to make a new view called tweet page. It's going to contain all our tweets. So usually you do the content, but since I let the entity API know about my entity, I can now pull entity into views. I think I might already have a tweet page, so let's just slap a 2 on there. And so here, your fields and your information are already included in the view itself. So you have all your properties, like my label, when I created at, updated at, the tweet day, all the fields that I created. You can do just like you do in views. Everybody that does views, just pretty much the same thing. You can do relationships. It all works. And so I'm going to render the Twitter teaser. Let's go ahead and add a filter here. Let's say handle, Twitter handle.
10 minutes.
Okay. I'll wrap it up here. So here, you make it searchable. So Mark, let's pull Marks. So there, bam, you have your entities in a view on a page. So it's pretty straightforward on that. And then it's going a lot longer than I thought, but let me just show you a couple things. Where I'm pulling in from the Twitter API, basically what I'm doing here is I'm sending it the tweet, which is the information I get from Twitter, and using a function called entity create, and it just gives you a base entity class, and I send it the title, and then I'm wrapping it in my metadata wrapper here, and I'm saying Twitter real name, and here's set the value, Twitter handle set, and I set the information, and then I just do entity save, and bam, you've got your entity saved to the database. So it makes being able to update and create and everything really easy. So if you are pulling from a service or whatever, and I think that's about it, really. Do you have any questions, I guess, or kind of went through it hard and heavy, so I hope I didn't lose anybody.
So for these files, are they available also through Bitly, so we can sort of inspect and see how you did that? Yeah. The link I gave at the beginning, I put this in a GitHub repo, and so you feel free. Oh, before I forget, and let's just go through the rest of the slides. The cons of custom entities, they're not as easy to create initially as you would with content types. Node-specific contrib modules, they a lot of times won't work out of the box with your entity, so that is the downside. Features does not know about your entity, so you know how normally you create a content type and I say I want to create a feature. It doesn't work like that. But you can still add your information to features. Where do we go from here? Look into the entity API. There's a push for the entity construction kit. So last time I tried to use it, it worked somewhat well. But I'm hoping in the future that instead of making everything nodes, maybe this entity construction kit will be the key and make people be able to easily make entities. Model entity is a base module to allow you to help create your entity. It's not actually a module. It's like you download it and you look at their code. But I find that it's a little bit more complex. Entity caching, entity cache. Also on my GitHub, I created what's called the Entity X feature, and it's basically an entity. And what I do is I just go and I do a find and replace Entity X with the name of my entity that I want, and bam, I've got an entity with everything I need. So it makes it quick. You need it. And then resources and shoutouts. DrupalEyes.me, where I actually learn about entities. So I would definitely suggest going on there and watching their videos on entities, since obviously I didn't go into great detail. Drupal.org, and then there's a book called Programming Drupal Entities by Sammy Spetz, which is a pretty good book. And I think that's it, really.
All right.
Any other questions or anything? Or has anybody created entities, custom entities?
Not yet.
After this, you guys will start now.
That entity X feature you're talking about, where you get to find and replace, is that available as well?
Yeah, it's on just github.com/Chad Peppers, and it'll be on there. I'll probably make some changes to it, so keep it up to date. And a lot of people ask why would I create my own entity whenever, besides a performance issue. Another issue, a reason is maybe in your content you don't want 10,000 tweets cluttering up your content, And I think Drupal 8, I haven't looked greatly into Drupal 8, but I think they are doing a big push towards entities and being able to do that. So.
Two claps. One for